as well as Joseph Stong out from Wyoming Catholic College in Lander, Wyoming, talking to us about some important events that are taking place in the news and in our society. And we have got a great interview towards the end of the program with a new sponsor that we have here, Humberto Gonzalez. I think you'll enjoy what he has to offer and give him an opportunity to talk about himself and his products. But I want to start off by talking about, obviously, the news of the week, what's been transpiring in America. A lot to cover. Obviously, the most important thing has been the Republican National Convention this week. 4 days, a very stark contrast from what we've seen in the Democratic National Convention. For me, what perhaps resonated the most was the individuals that were talking at the Republican National Convention. Unlike the Democratic National Convention that was sort of focused on a lot of celebrities, a lot of professional politicians, current and past, the Republican National Convention took a much different approach. The Republican National Convention focused on the life stories of people that have been positively affected by the Trump administration's actions with both the economy and on social issues over the past 3 or 4 years. And I thought that was very powerful. We heard from a lobsterman in Maine who, because of Trump's negotiations on tariffs with Europe over the lobsters, was now making a lot more money and being able to provide for his family than he was several years ago. We heard from a dairy farmer in Wisconsin, a woman, I think her name was Chris Jones, talking about how the Trump's renegotiation of a trade deal with Canada helped her and her dairy farm. We heard from a machining and foundry operator, same situation, you know, how Trump's renegotiation with the Chinese had helped save her business. All legitimate stories. I mean, these were not, you know, paid professional Republican operatives that were out there. There were people that obviously were friendly to Trump, but they were friendly to Trump because Trump had actually done something positive for them. And it wasn't just about business. The woman that was perhaps most impactful, Alice Johnson, I believe her name was, who had been released from prison as a result of Trump having passed through some very important criminal justice reform in America. That had nothing to do with business. And it was her story. It was her story about how she spent 22 years in prison for a nonviolent drug offense. Why? Because of the severe penalties imposed by the 1994 Crime Act, which was championed by Joe Biden in that period of time. That was very, very powerful to watch her and hear her life story and how the president's actions had directly benefited her and were continuing to benefit people that were in a similar situation to hers. So I think it was a very, very big contrast. There was no Eva Longoria. There was no, you know, Julie Dreyfus, you know, the Seinfeld star. There wasn't a whole lot of attempts at, you know, comedy or, you know, being funny or whatever. And there was a lot of talk about America and its diversity and unifying America as a result of that diversity and making our country stronger. It was not about, oh my God, you know, you've left me out of the equation because I'm LGBTQ plus, or you left me out and I feel aggrieved because of this or because of that. Folks, you know, what unites us as Americans is much more important than our sexual orientation, our religion, our gender, the color of our skin, none of that stuff. We're here in the land of freedom and equal opportunity where everybody can succeed, where everybody is entitled to live their own version of the American dream. And sometimes we forget that and we focus on all these different things that separate us. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're having the troubles that we're in right now, because people are focusing on the things that divide us rather than the things that unite us. That's not to belittle, you know, the tragic killing of George Floyd or the other, you know, shooting that happened recently as well in Kenosha and in Wisconsin. It's not to diminish any of that stuff. I mean, look, we've got problems in this country. We've got 18,000 different police forces throughout the United States. Guess what? Not all of them are as well trained perhaps as they should be. There might still be, some vestiges of racism in some police forces. They may not always have the best de-escalation training. They may not all be having body cameras to make sure that everything gets taped and that, the cops, when they're enforcing the law, know that they're being recorded. It's a big country, 50 different states, a bunch of territories and provinces, throughout the world. Very different country. Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. This is a very diverse place. And you're always going to have problems. You're always going to have difficulties. But what brings us together as Americans is much more important than the things that separate us. A couple other things I want to mention besides the convention, which, like I said, I thought was fantastic. By far and away in that convention, before I forget, probably the most impactful person, the widow of retired police officer David Dorn, who was killed as a result of responding to a burglar alarm at a friend's business that he went to investigate. Found himself with a bunch of looters who basically shot and killed him and live streamed the whole thing as he was dying. I mean, just a horrific story told by his widow. And you know what? She said the same thing that I've been saying right now. We need to sort of put behind all this talk about our differences and focus on our humanity and focus on who we are as Americans. That is much more important than all the other things that divide us. Some other important news this week, which you may or may not have heard of because, the Republican National Convention and the violence that we're seeing on the streets has been so impactful. But we had a very strong durable goods order number come out the other day. Car sales basically drove that strong number. I believe it was up, I forget, around almost 20% or so. Actually, around 12%, I believe. And it was a remarkable number because, it's obvious that at least automotive manufacturers and automobile dealers are back to selling automobiles in America. And that's very, very important. There are a lot of secondary effects whenever we sell automotive vehicles in America. The secondary market for parts, for all the stuff that goes into making an automobile have a huge ripple effect throughout the economy. So seeing that industry is rebounding, very, very important. We also saw, once again, the S&P 500 reaching new highs. The Dow Jones Industrial Average almost returning to the same levels that it was at prior to the pandemic. Why is that important? You may not have money in the stock market, or you may think you don't have money in the stock market, but if you've got a pension fund of any sort, if you've got a 401k plan, you do have money in the stock market, and that is reflected in your net worth and what your savings accumulate to. Stock markets are sort of imperfect but pretty rational predictors of what the future will bring. Investors don't care whether they're Republican. They don't think about themselves being Republicans or Democrats. They think about making money. And stock prices reflect the future expectations of earnings for those companies. So when you're seeing stock prices being driven up, it's because the people that are buying those stocks are very optimistic that the earnings for those publicly traded companies is going to be much higher in the short term than they are right now. And that's why you're seeing stock prices going up, because the expectation is that, in fact, the price of the earnings of those companies is going to go up in 2021 and beyond. And I think that's a very, very good sign for America and for our country. And it gives us hope that we will soon be out of this horrible economic mess that we're in as a result of this pandemic. Obviously, the other big item of the week, the continued violence and protests going on in America. It seems that only yesterday, apparently, Joe Biden suddenly realized that he was vulnerable for not having spoken out on the issue of violence on America. And he quickly scrambled some of his friends in the media at ABC and CNN to do a quick interview in which, he made a public statement denouncing the violence. but it sure took them a long time. There was no talk about that during the Democratic National Convention. There was nary a mention of the violence in America. And I think, we need to confront the reality. The Democrats didn't want to talk about the violence because they figured that so long as there was this violence taking place in America, and by the way, this violence taking place primarily in Democratic-controlled states and municipalities. So long as this was taking place, it played to their benefit because it made Trump look bad. Trump being the President of the United States, the buck stops here at the White House, right? And they were thinking, well, you know what, so long as this chaos is going on, it makes Trump look bad, and Joe Biden can just sort of sit in his basement indefinitely, and we will coast to an election victory on November 3rd. Well, guess what happened? American people are watching what's going on their TV screens, and they're hearing Trump talking about the need for law and order, and they're hearing Trump telling the governors, hey, we're willing to help, willing to send you federal assistance if you need it. We'll send you, marshals, we'll send you DOJ officials, we'll send you FBI agents. Whatever you need to get a handle on this, we'll send it your way. But the request has to come from these governors, and it has to come from these municipalities, because that's the way our federal system operates. If they don't ask, the federal government cannot intervene in these affairs.